Well, the tentacle sessions were an exciting and important chapter for me. It was where I'd only fairly recently gotten to San Francisco, and so it was kind of the first big event that I became a part of. My partner Danielle is still my partner. You may meet her in a second. We produced a couple events together. I'd produced events in Virginia, where I'd come from before I got here, and Richmond, Virginia, and a new nightclub was opening in North Beach. Legendary, iconic San Francisco neighborhood, North Beach, and a few of our friends and us got invites. Actually, I think Danielle was probably the one invited. But anyway, we get to this thing, and it's like, hey, we want event producers to come and check out our space and see if they want to produce things there. And we ran pretty simple events in that we expected them to pretty much pay for themselves. We weren't making money off them, but it gave us a chance to do some art, show off our friends' art. And this is very underground stuff, even if it was on, it wasn't all in warehouses, but it was simple and not fancy, not something the curators were coming around to see per se. So we arrive at this club. It's called the Black Cat, and they have this downstairs bar called the Blue Bar, which is very, very fancy. And they have just free food and drinks for us. And we're like walking around kind of stunned because we don't have to pay for anything, and we're broke. That's the kind of thing it is. This is like probably 1996, 97. Yeah. And we find our friends are there. Our friends, John Law and Scott Beale, were there. Probably a few others too. But the four of us end up at a table. And I remember saying, we could never, our friends, because our friends come out to our events. We don't get people to come from 3 counties away to come to our events. Our friends are never going to come to a place like this in this neighborhood. I mean, you can't even park. It's hard to get here on public transit. Like, that's sort of the practical things we would think about. And how much would we have to charge for something here? But it's like, we couldn't get them to come out here. But if we could, it would be just like 1 month. It would have to be like it's a special occasion. And so it's like, what kind of event could we do that was a really special occasion? And we decided that I realized that there were all these artists that we hung out with, but we never saw their art. It's the nature of San Francisco's art scene, at least it was at that time. What at that time was sort of kind of the broth, the witch's pot that Burning Man and a bunch of other things would kind of come out of. Evolutionary step between missing link between these two things in the late 90s, and we were so it's like you were too busy going to parties and having fun to actually like see each other's work. I think sometimes to make work. It was like if you were a painter or a sculptor, I bet it was really hard. I bet you weren't making much work. If you're a comedian or theater or an aerialist or something, there were a lot of chances to perform. But we had a friend who's a really well-known performance artist, had been written up in international journals. We have another friend who for, like 40 plus years had been an internationally known cartoonist and had many incredible talents, which we discovered more of as we went along. Hal, yeah.
And Michael Pepe?
And Michael Pepe, exactly. And so we're like, we should do, it's like a spotlight on them. And we took, decided to call it the Tentacle Sessions, tentacle from Laughing Squid. So another tentacle of the various activities and projects that Scott was doing. So the Tentacle Sessions, and sessions came both from John Peel of BBC Radio, who was famous for getting these one-of-a-kind performances from British musicians, really musicians from wherever that would come and play in his studio. And also there was something going on at the time called the Future Primitive Sound Sessions, which was another like DJ turntable hip hop thing. So technical sessions seemed like the thing to do once a month at this club called the Black Cat. And I think it was something that was really special. We did really put a spotlight on some of these folks and share work that they'd never done. It was, for me, I've gone on to be a producer of these types of events, and I really learned because it was like really sitting down with somebody, and I would tell them every time, okay, don't think of this as just like you're going up to talk about your work like you're at a class or something like that. It's like, this is your artwork. So this moment of presentation, it's like you're going to bring in multimedia stuff, you're going to like turn the whole club into a courtroom. We're gonna bend reality or change or delight people in the same way that you want your work to do it. So we're gonna show and do as well as tell, and I think we made some really special things happen.
Yeah, and it came out of the knowing all of these different artists in different fields, painters, writers, performers, actors,
Yeah.
Performance artists, scientists. I mean, we didn't stop. It's just,
Yeah.
we knew all these interesting people, and we wanted to showcase them, and particularly we wanted to showcase Hal Robbins. I think that
Yeah.
was the main, when we first started, we were talking about how we just wanted to do an event where he would actually get the entire door.
Yeah.
Which is what
Yeah.
happened. That's how that went.
Yeah.
So.
And then Hal did so well that he would end up being our kind of annual. We would do and the story that happened with Hal. And if you're familiar with the Church of the Subgenius, it is well, I could walk in the other room and pull my Subgenius books off the bookshelf, but Three-Fisted Tales of Bob and whatnot. It is an kind of alternate reality cult that is easy to take seriously in a very funny way, and vice versa. And Hal was doing this the whole time that he was a cartoonist in the Zap Comics tradition, really continuing the Mad Magazine tradition, and his art was appearing everywhere. But Hal is just a one-of-a-kind. He's a treasure. He's a very San Francisco kind of character. He's originally from the Southwest and had moved here. And actually, it's another one of the sort of foundational pieces, the kind of tectonic plates of this scene. I think, one is the tradition of, like the Whole Earth Catalog and the sort of, I don't know, the Just Do sort of DIY spirit of some of that. I think that's in there. I think the punk tradition is part of it. But there's a sort of transplanted tradition, which includes Hal and Doug Wellman, another Church of the Subgenius guy, and a few others. They were part of the mail art tradition. And these were people who were just like, well, let's see what we can mail through. It was like they would mail a piece and a la Exquisite Corpse or something. They would add something to it and mail it along to the next person. And they would also do conceptual and performance pieces like, can we mail a rock if we just put enough postage on it? There were, a lot of, bizarre creative, a pig. I didn't know that one, but that's, yeah, of course.
How did you meet or link up with the Cacophony Society when you first arrived?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I know a big part of it was, I mentioned Scott Beale already, and Scott already had what at the time was called the Alpha Squids email list. And I got on that, the first, so I already knew some people, and I should back up for a second. I was coming from Richmond, Virginia. I had gone to college at a university called James Madison in the Shenandoah Valley. And there were a group of us friends, all told probably about 7 or 8 of us, who over the course of like 3 years moved out here. We had, over the years, been following Wired Magazine, Mondo 2000 Magazine, and various other, well, the way that I talk about it is, William Gibson's got his famous line that the future's already here, it's just not evenly distributed. Well, San Francisco has a lot more of the future than Harrisonburg, Virginia, where I'm from. And so, or where I was going to college. Richmond, Virginia is my hometown. And we relied on, you know, I could pull things off my shelf, but I'm not seeing that right now. The books.
We're going to insert
yeah,
stuff.
yeah, no, I know.
If you want images,
Yeah.
just pick them out, give them to him. We'll take photographs of them, and you're going to insert
like
them.
the books of that Research Books was putting out.
We'll insert research books
Yeah.
right there.
Yeah. the Film Threat, what it was putting out, Fantagraphics Comics,
Maximum Rock and Roll.
Maximum Rock and Roll. We were thirsty and we were grabbing it, and anything that you saw that even had a glimmer of, you would pounce on. So, you know, in the year like 94, 95, I drove out here in the fall of 95. We knew about Burning Man already. As a matter of fact, when I got here, I was like, it's so big. Wow, it's over already.
Yeah, it was over the next year.
Yeah, it's the lesson I take from that is every year you get there, they will tell you you just missed it. Like
we've been doing
the
that
last
since
year was the
1980.
best year, but it never is, because the first year you're there is the best year. None of them are capable of being the
That's how
best
it
year
goes with everything, Michael.
if you weren't there. Yeah.
if you're really living life, that's how it goes with everything.
But that's the kind of attitude that everyone should allow for themselves. At any rate,
What year did you arrive?
95.
He came here right at exactly the right time. That's
I-
when you came here.
We
No
live.
better year.
I literally.
In a lot of ways.
My buddy Seth and I literally hit the road from Richmond, Virginia on the day that Jerry Garcia died. And in August of 95. And
Wow, did you get here in time to see the Seaman show, The Death of Garcia?
no.
We
didn't know about
We were
it.
doing a Seaman show at the Trocadero, and and Jerry Garcia died, and our show was like a week later. So we made all these Jerry Garcia props and blew them up and burned them and hanged them. And anyway, it was really sacrilegious.
Yeah, it took us over a week to get out here, I think. But I think one of the first things I remember was an ATA event where Mark Perez had his V8 blender out on the sidewalk. And it was not even like, I don't even know if it was an event or they're just like, oh, I got it in the car. Okay, here we go.
Jim Mason probably.
Oh, yeah.
Blender, yeah.
Maybe. Oh,
Yeah, it wasn't
okay,
Mark
sorry.
Perez's, yeah,
sorry.
Jim, yeah, but anyway.
Mark, I think Mark was there. Yeah, it was.
Sure he was there.
It's all a little bit
He
hard
was
to
doing
tell.
the mousetrap.
But I think the way it worked was Craig Baldwin's list, Craig's list, led me to Scott Beale's list because he would cross-post Scott's stuff at the time. And then I think from there, I went to Chicken John's, I think the very first game show, Jeopardy
At
Cell Space.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So I missed church.
Jeopardy, yeah.
I missed the church era.
Right.
I missed Defenestration, which breaks my heart as well. The opening party. But so I went to Jeopardy. I had no idea what the hell was going on. A few of these things
Nobody did.
Yeah. Well, but I walked in and they're like, I believe Trinchi, known as Pearl these days. Pearl was working the door.
Yep.
And she's like, oh, no, you have to pay. You have to pay. I think it was maybe the first one there. It's like, no, you have to spin this wheel, and that'll decide how much you pay. And I'm like, even chicken spins the wheel. I was like, chicken? It's a chicken. I don't know. But we went in, and it was remarkable how actually it was kind of funny, and actually it kind of kept up, it wasn't just a complete mess. And I think I was impressed. I think it was that show that had a John D. MacDonald book reference in it.
Okay,
So,
yeah. That would have been Hal or me. I mean,
yeah.
probably Hal.
But anyway, yeah, that started to become, so that's what got me started on the road to the road to infamy, the road to cacophony. You know, that was certainly not a cacophony event in the adventurous spirit of cacophony events, but
No, not so much.
but I also remember very well, like arriving a little bit early one time and seeing a ponytailed man, you know, like painting signs and hammering this big game board together. Your John's long ass hair's days.
Yeah, that would have been me. Yeah, so just a brief explanation. There'll be images going over when I'm talking.
Yeah.
So just so you know. So the game he talked about Chicken John and the church shows and the game shows. The church shows took place in an old punk rock warehouse on 16th Street, and those are like 95, 96.
And I mostly know about those
96,
because Danielle,
97.
my partner, went to them and praises them all the way. And I know the name of that space too.
And then the game shows took place at Cell Space, which is a wonderful underground community-based art space in the Mission. And so these shows were put together. They're do-it-yourself shows that were built by the people who were performing or playing in them. Usually the day of the show, they were cobbled together. So sometimes they were really absurd and terrible, and other times they were just awesome. It's hard to describe how that whole process happened. And as Chris Ratcliffe pointed out, Chicken John was the first person in Cacophony to run a cash bar, because it's basically the antithesis of the whole idea of Cacophony, having an event where you charge money, right? So, and just as an aside, but they were so chaotic and so fun and so collaborative that you know, nobody like made a big stink out of that, and he didn't make much money. Nobody made much money at any of this, or any money really. And
again, something that I get, I think I'm paraphrasing, if not quoting Danielle, because I miss the church experiences. But she said, you know, it was like a Sunday night thing, and it was like this community thing. You would see all your friends, you would know they would be there, and the game show had elements of that too. And what I was coming from a scene in Richmond, Virginia, which is much smaller, which has no chance of ever making any kind of big time, where literally, and this is what was magical about it, you would walk out, like, I explain it now to say our San Francisco was one street, and it was about like 6-7 blocks of this one street. It's called Grace Street. It's still there, but like the only health food store for many, many years, the only health food store, probably the only store with like yoga supplies or whatever, the art cinema, the best record store, two main venues that like touring bands would play, and maybe one more for acoustic acts. And every night you would go out, you knew your friends would either be at the bar at this end of the street or the bar at that end of the street.
Right.
It was that small, it was that tight knit. But you also knew that you had to invite the hippies. If you're a punk band, you invite the hippies, you invite everybody. And if you're a filmmaker, you've got to go to the sculptors shows, because we wouldn't have an audience if we didn't all support each other. There just weren't enough people. We defined ourselves because we were different than all this normal culture around us, all this, you know, mall court and, you know, Republican voting and not thinking critically sort of world that was around us. And VCU is an art school. Most people don't know, but GWAR is actually, the band GWAR comes from Richmond, Virginia.
I knew that.
Yeah. And they are, and they were an engine of a lot of interesting and weird things happen. And they're
like a rock band, a Cacophony rock band in a way, and how they.
Yeah. Well, and as I've said, I mean, this happens a few times. I'm pretty sure. It's something I would like to research in the history of weird San Francisco culture is more about the Tubes, because the Tubes seem to share something with GWAR in that they had a larger art department than they had musicians. So there were more people making costumes and masks and special effects and working out lighting and nonsense. And then the like 6 people who are on stage actually strumming things and pounding on things.
Right. 6'6" waybill in like 12-inch, like
Yeah.
shoes.
Yeah, hell yeah. And that was impressive. And the scene was so small that their workshop was on the top floor of this warehouse, and it looked out on one of the 2 main clubs, probably the main club where bands played. So they would,
And this
as
is
a,
still
as,
Richmond
as,
we're
a, as a
talking
high school kid coming into the city to go see Echo and the Buddymen or whatever the hell I was
Right.
there to see,
The Smiths.
Fishbone or whatever. We had some good, bands come through, but like the big guy in the leather jacket in front of me was like having this yelling conversation with a guy on the top floor of the warehouse across the way, and it's the lead singer of Guar, or whether I
So
would
this
find
is
out
Richmond.
later.
This is the atmosphere that you came out of in Richmond, Virginia.
Yeah.
When you came here in
Yeah,
the, in the
and
mid
then
90s.
and when I came here, well, one thing I would eventually learn, I'd eventually realize that San Francisco is such a beacon, always has been, and at a time of, in the 90s, the economy was pretty good. There was more mobility. There was more, people had some more options to move around. And so people were, the internet was beginning to start up.
Yeah.
And so it was like a lighthouse, and it was drawing people that were creative or free spirits or whatever you want to say, but they could all gather together with people that were like them. And so my joke is always, oh, the queer Latina performance artists don't hang out with the straight Latina performance artists because like
There was a big enough
back in
community.
Richmond, yeah, they had enough people
Yeah.
to have a critical mass where they could make an audience of just them, and they could explore identity for the first time, especially for people that had come from some really small repressive town that couldn't even like we could in Richmond get enough to fill a small ballroom and have
So
one of
in
those
San
things.
Francisco, you could have like these multiple scenes, and each scene
Yeah.
was self-contained because there
Yeah.
were enough people to be in it. That's where actually early Burning Man was a truly brilliant and really inspirational event.
Yeah.
Because it brought together all these different communities of
Yeah.
people. That's what it did, and
Well,
they put them in the same place, and they had to get along with one another.
I think there are 2 things to that. I think one is the opportunity Cacophony provided, but I think the other thing is the people, because there are some people who, just like they were restless before, are now restless again because, hey, I'm not being challenged. I mean, back in Richmond, all of these weird collaborations would happening. The dancer and the filmmaker are, doing a project together or whatever. And, but so I feel like it's like the people that are ready to sort of jump to something new, because like the Sisters of Perpetual Indulgence, the drag queen nuns, who are a fantastic group, an incredible group.
Did a lot of crossover with Cacophony.
Well, they have their
kidding.
big focus is on the gay community. They do a lot of great charity work, fundraising. They do and just sort of social events for the gay community, and that's their focus. But not all of them come out to Cacophony events.
Not at all, but
There's
a
a
big
group,
percentage,
there's a
big group,
handful, and that's why I say, oh, these are like the electrons that are excited, so excited.
Right.
They need to jump to a new
Well,
challenge
Sister
to
Dana
like
of Iniquity and
play some of the
Sister Kitty Catalyst.
Yep.
And then
Sister
Reign of Terror.
Reign of
A
Terror.
couple of others that
A
were
few
really
others,
big
exactly.
in Cacophony
Cabana
around
Boy.
Yeah.
I forget Cabana Boy's.
Yeah, so there's a nice crossover. But that's what made Cacophony and then early Burning Man really special.
Yeah.
Is that there was that crossover between those different groups. And
Yeah.
going on, and with that in mind, Bianca, how did Bianca get started? How did they connect with Cacophony? And
So, Bianca is short for Bianca's Smut Shack. To the extent it still exists, and I haven't checked in a minute, but it's bianca.org. And I guess, two things to say to set things up about Bianca. Bianca has always, in one way or another, been about community. And I guess these are the two things that attract me to them and that attract me to most projects, groups, what have you. There's a focus on connection and community in a real way, and people being themselves. And in Bianca's and that they're originals and they're honest, they're originals. And Bianca was the website was an incredible trailblazer. There are two guys behind it. They were the year is I'll double check these
93,
dates.
94.
92, 93. Yeah, probably 92. Let's call it 92.
Okay.
Because this all happens online first.
And they were influenced by Mondo 2000 and that whole milieu, kind of, or do you know
Well,
more?
but before any of that, they were just computer grad students. They were. It was right around Valentine's Day in so February of let's say 92. They're at U Chicago, and there's this new thing called the World Wide Web. So, brief technology refresher, the internet was around for a long time, and the web, these interconnected web pages were built over time, and that was a whole technology. It's like, hey, you've got a planet and then you build train tracks on it, or you build a highway system on top of it. Well, the web was that. And so the first what do they call the golden spike? What's the first spike that's driven for the web? Was there in the early 90s, and basically, one of these two guys. It was like, it was around, it was right around spring break. That's like, I don't know, the Valentine's Day or the spring break thing, but basically, this guy heard about something called the web, and and this is akin to like, hey, here's a bicycle, here's a car. Oh, how's it work? I don't know, play around with it. Here's some tools, and you could probably figure it out. It's a really simple machine, if you just take a little bit of time and know that these tools do something with it. And so one of these guys built a website. Like he built, well, I'll build a slot car that can run on that
And
track.
This is when hardly anybody had website.
Yeah.
They
Bianca was literally one of the first 1,000 websites ever, and so he built that, and he was, maybe some of it was for schoolwork for his his graduate project, and a lot of it was just for fun and sort of exploring and like adding to this world that, again, there's very little charted territory here. He's making new territory as he goes. His buddy's off on vacation and comes back, and he's like, what's this? Oh, that's a website. I built it while you were gone. And what he did was, not only did he build a website, so he built it based on their apartment. So each page was, this is the kitchen, this is the bathroom, this is the living room, this is the bedroom. It's like, oh, that's interesting. And he built a chat function into the site. So that was the first ever web-based chat where people could actually communicate. There were other ways that people could chat, something called IRC, but that's a whole different little window you've got open and so forth. But this way, on a web page, you could be talking. I mean, this is a time when you couldn't put an image on a web
somebody
page.
else could look at your web page in Rhode Island or in India or whatever.
But they're just seeing text. There are no special effects. Right. There are no images. Some things you could probably download some files off a link from there, but nothing fancy was going on. So I always liken it to, it was like the web was all physics papers and one nightclub. And Bianca was the nightclub. So as you might expect, it was famous very quickly. And so most people who are, because everyone was new to the web at that time, who are getting on the web, they're going either to Bianca's either the first or the second website they go to, because it's either the reason they're going on is to check out this thing they've heard about, or as soon as they go on because they have to for school or work, the next thing they want to do is check out this thing they've been hearing about.
But then another thing that made Bianca really appealing in the early days was the fact that it was oriented a lot around sex.
Yeah, that's and it was called Bianca's Smut Shack, and I, honestly was not a part of it in those days, so I don't know. I
You got involved a
know.
little bit later.
Yeah, and I mean, I know that it was definitely not a porn site. It was more about people could express themselves, including, play around with dirty chat or whatever they wanted to do. We did a little bit of that in our Burning Man world as ever. But anyway, to jump ahead, Wired magazine back in those days, as I said, the web is tiny. So, and Wired magazine had about the only professional website out there, which that was called hotwired.com at the time.
Yeah, John
And
Haldeman.
by professional, that means both that it was the best as far as design and so forth. It had some of the best people working on it, but it was also the only place that was paying anybody to do this weird tech stuff. And so, of course, everyone would send them resumes, which is like, nice try, but the reality is they would just look at what websites were people going to, and then they would call those people up and go, do you want a job? And Dave and Chris, the guys who founded Bianca, can tell the story better about how the university didn't even know they existed. And so for years, it's still, I mean, they're a big enterprise, so it's not like they were huge bills and they were like bankrupting the university, but eventually it got significant and they were like, what's going on here? And they had to move their servers to be hosted somewhere else. And they eventually brought them out
So they were
and
getting
Wired
a
hosted
lot
them.
of traffic, and that got
Yeah,
the attention of the
yeah.
university, and they had to pull it off of the university servers.
They had kind of already, it was not quite as the direct or as happily
How
as.
do you think those guys and their immediate correspondents were influenced by the San Francisco scene, and if at all by Cacophony or their early Burning Man experiences?
Well, they had heard about Burning Man. They, like me, I mean, there really was in that time, there were just so many of us that were waiting for the web to arrive and help us connect to each other. What I always used to say is we would communicate by T-shirts. Like, if you saw somebody with a KMFDM T-shirt on, that meant it was somebody you wanted to know. If you heard somebody mention Oingo Boingo, like, you should clearly be friends, because these sort of niche cultural experiences, if you go to the Fellini film, like, anybody in that audience, the 8 people there, is probably someone you want to go out for drinks with afterwards. And the smaller the community, the more that was the case. So and it was a bummer because we didn't have what we wanted, but it was great because we were questing. We were hungry. We had really sharp vision for things. It's like, oh my God, it's that guy who was in that other movie. I should check out this movie because maybe it's got maybe it's got zombies too. Whatever your thing was, and again, strange alliances of people that are into different subcultures. And so I guess that's one other thing, is there's a readiness for Cacophony because there is that that heterogeneity of interests, of otherness, that they're excited about. Oh, it's weird and it's different. I mean, I was going to ask you about like the true crime thing, because there's some true crime, the Fatty Arbuckle thing we were talking about.
Yeah.
Like, the zine thing was something was happening, in my, but I'm curious, like.
Well, the influence, I know what you're talking about here, and the influence that came from the Suicide Club, from Gary and a handful of other people out of community university, who were creating events based on fiction and film and things that influenced them or that they liked.
Yeah.
And then we would create events based on that. So it's literally like life following art. Okay, and so like the Fatty Arbuckle Caper, which you mentioned, was a Don Herron event, which is the most elaborate thing I'd say the Suicide Club did as far as a role-playing game went. And it took place over like 2 days. It took us 2-3 months to set it up. Major characters were developed over the course of a couple of months, and there were maybe 6 or 7 major characters, and we developed our characters. We talked to one another and figured out what we wanted to do. And there's like the head of the detectives. There were a couple of different gangsters. There was Fatty Arbuckle himself. There was people, the United Artists people who were trying to protect him. There was the district attorney, and so there were these major characters. And Don Herron recruited people from his walking tours to do these characters. And then the Suicide Club people, with Suicide Club precursor to Cacophony, they were the second tier of characters, which were kind of invested in their character. Maybe they'd read some mystery fiction. They would make their personal character based on some character they'd read about. So you could pick it from any. So you'd have a Ross McDowell character, and with a Hammond character, and with a Jake Canino, which was a Chandler character, all interspersed and in this made-up universe that we created as we were playing the game, based on these little precepts. So those are the first 2 tiers, like the really involved, kind of the leaders of the different sects. Then the second level, which are the smart guys, like the street ops. And then there were Charlie Oldham, who played Dashiell Hammond in this game, what he called the hats. And they were the Suicide Club people that just showed up for the day of the event wearing a hat. And so each one of the main characters would have what Charlie said, there'd be a sea of hats following me wherever I went. But anyway, so he would lead the different characters. And you could, so this is how you built this game up. And so that, Cacophony did some things, kind of carried on in that tradition to some degree. But I'd say that was probably the most elaborate one. You mentioned that one, so we have a lot of images to go along with this story. So,
well, and so I actually tell the story in the Tales of the San Francisco Cacophony Society book.
Yeah.
It's a section called the Cacophony. I'm not going to read this chapter and verse, but it's nice.
Show it on the...
I did fact check this, so it's good to just at least get the date right in this. Yeah, so there was a lot of character. I guess one thing is there's a lot of character in. We were kids out of school doing our first job.
Yeah.
Pretty much 90%. There were a few people that had been in, technology before who were working at websites, but.
I have a question.
Yeah.
What was your background in computers before you came up?
Yeah. Well, basically just knowing geeks is the short answer to that. The true answer to that. My generation, where I was at was, we still didn't quite know what they were good for, meaning our parents didn't either. Supposedly you could print a household budget, whatever that was, and pie charts. Like that's what all the ads would be like.
Computer.
I don't know who ever printed a pie chart, and then they probably had to throw away their printer because that used up all the ink in the county. But we would write our papers and print our papers on computers. And if you had a little more initiative, you could find the way to get online. These are with the old, of course, the modems where you put an actual phone receiver in a machine and it talks to the void, which is too difficult to explain.
Like
but
a David Cronenberg film.
Yeah, it's very much like
70s.
exactly. Let me just attach this to my.
Right.
So it was clear that something was going on. War Games, the film, had happened, and it was definitely not cool yet. Now is an amazing time. It was still very much, the nerds. I do have an amazing story. It's not my story, but I will share this because it's a pretty great story. To get a real feel for these times, by the way, there's a guy named Jason Scott who works with the Internet Archive, and he's the guy who was he was that guy who had the initiative, had a little bit of tech know-how and a little bit of equipment. A lot of times it was the people whose parents had been working with mainframes or whatever, like they had an edge. Because their parents had been waiting for this, reading Arthur C. Clarke and waiting for this forever. And
Right.
and that was not me. But this friend of mine, I'm sure you guys and everyone at home have heard of the Anarchist Handbook, which you don't need. The things that you need are available elsewhere.
Revisionist stuff around that book going on now,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's an interesting touchstone
Yeah.
book
Yeah.
for sure.
So it would be the ultimate thing in suburban Virginia to find a copy of it and to download it. And a friend of mine did that. And I actually didn't know him at the time. He was in middle school at the time. This was literally 1984 when he did this.
He downloaded the Anarchist
Cookbook
in 1984.
off the internet. Yeah.
Wow.
And again,
That's funny.
this is not the web. The web doesn't exist. He's kind of going through these like text-only screens and entering arcane commands, and he gets it. He downloads it. He prints it out because his buddy wants a copy of it in print. Okay. Now, the thing about, and this is helpful to say because, so everyone's got a screen name starting in that world, and that's something that passes through. And it's very interesting because it comes through to cacophony names
Right.
and playa names or whatever they're
That came out of the
called.
Suicide Club originally, where we make up names for events that we were doing. Make up different names.
And I noticed my friends that moved to New York had personality changes, like profound personality changes. They became more selfish, less communicative, because of my take was because there's so many damn people. How can you deal with how many people there
New York's
are?
very competitive, especially in the arts and
And that
theater.
time
it's very
was
competitive, and people don't share as much
Yeah,
there. You have
yeah,
to be getting
exactly.
paid to work for somebody.
Exactly. And so, but interestingly, when people moved to San Francisco, and maybe the larger West Coast, I guess I knew more people that had moved to SF than LA, they changed their names. It was like they took on a different persona. There, they kept the same name and just sort of became more selfish, became more, I don't know. But I had one friend who started going by his middle name, other friends who just, and even me, Michael McElligott is my name from birth. And I'm jumping a little bit, the first time, if you start work at a company, many companies will just give you your email address and it's your first name dot your last name or something unimaginative like that. I didn't want that to happen, but sometimes you don't have any voice in it. And the first time that I had a chance to, which was before I moved to the West Coast, I had a chance to make my own. I was like, well, what am I going to do? I've got to do something interesting. Come on, Michael, you've got 5 minutes. And I was like, okay, well, my last name is McElligott, which is pretty long. So it's like, how can I shorten the number of keystrokes so I can just, it's faster to log. So, so way fewer characters, MIKL-EM or EM. And the reality was that was only an online name. So for most of the time I had it up until a few years ago, that's how someone would have encountered it because they were on an email list with me or something. And so I didn't care how they pronounced it because it was theirs. They had created a pronunciation for it. Michael, for me, I call myself Mikl-Em, but however they wanted to do it was fine because it was sound was a dimension, voicing of it was a dimension they had added themselves to it, and I wanted them to have that. at Hotwired, when I got to town, there were people named. There was a guy who went by 3. There was a guy who went by Toxic.
Yeah, right.
There were, and sometimes it was like
Mr.
Jim
Hungry.
P.
Mr. Hungry.
Yes,
John
yeah,
Alderman.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So there was this whole. Another went by Moses. So they all had their own things, and so I was not at all surprised when I discovered in Cacophony that here's Circus Boy and Michael and Danger Ranger and
Timothy Liddy.
and Puzzling Evidence, all these strange names. And it just felt it felt natural to me once I saw it. And for me, it's like you see a game for the first time and it's like, oh, I totally know how to play this. Like I picked it up right away, and I was starting to think of events that I could plan that would fit that game type, that
Which was
archetype.
encouraged, creating games and participating with other people or collaborating with other people, creating games or events was super encouraged.
And I've always felt, and I guess I had this sort of notion before, that there's like there's an extra gene, of the weirdo gene or whatever, and so we find each other. There are plenty of comic books and other fiction. You take the X-Men. There's a British show called The Tomorrow People. There are many others that have this idea of, oh, it's the next step of evolution, and they just need to find each other. They have these different powers, they have these different things, but they'll hone in, they'll find each other. And it felt a bit like that, honestly. This makes perfect sense to us. And honestly, it felt a lot easier than finding one T-shirt at a time. Here's a whole nest of them, and I can just dive right in. One of the other iconic things that me and my group of, like I said, 6 or 7 friends, was survival research labs. Now the legend that had built up even from afar around SRL was that, oh, well, the seats up front are free, because you might get killed. All this great crap.
Splattered with something.
Yeah. And, but so the Crime Wave show, which was 96, yeah, that it showed actually that we'd started to make the right internet friends, because when that was announced, however that was announced, it was ricocheting all over my groups of friends. And we were all like, okay, we're going to meet here, meet here, meet here. And we brought a big contingent, and we're like, we're here, we're actually at an SRL show. We got here just too late to go to Burning Man. Which was okay. We thought about it. But we really didn't have our other shit together enough to justify, spending the exorbitant ticket price at that time.
Right. Huh. Yeah.
So
You want a drink of water or something? Are you okay?
what's that? I think
Are
I
you
do.
feeling a little tired? You want to?
I don't have a problem
don't
on
want
that
that.
side. I keep slapping my mic. I'm sorry for your ears.
That's fine.
No, we.
It-
But yeah, if I can get,
Yes.
is that okay?
Well,